Does single player matter in an RTS? Let's talk about that a bit. So, build a factory, mine some crystals and research the chair upgrade, as it's time to sit down and discuss the importance of non-competitive play in strategy games. Making a successful RTS game is difficult. If you want your game to live longer than a mosquito at a thigh slapping competition, you're not only going to need lots of players, you're also going to need a consistent stream of new players to replace those that get bored and quit. Advertising is expensive, so it's probably not going to be financially viable to do enough of it to keep attracting people after your initial launch window, so you are going to be relying on the community to be self-supporting. This means that you want people to enjoy your game and to be excited enough to stream it on Twitch, to make YouTube videos about it and hopefully include it in some sort of regular tournament. The game needs to be good enough that people will recommend it to their friends. Even if you have managed to create an entertaining and balanced multiplayer system with a lot of replay value, you're going to need to achieve a critical mass of players before it will become self-sustaining. Getting good at a new game takes time, and a lot of people aren't going to want to invest that time into something that will only last a week or two. You also need to attract enough people for a matchmaking system to function properly, with short queue times and enough variation to provide for players of all skill levels. Creating a good single player experience gives you enough players to properly seed your multiplayer system. Company of Heroes 2 was generally considered to have a good multiplayer mode, and although 14% of players did at least play one auto-matched game, only 6% of those made it through to 10 games. As usual, it's difficult to get any hard sales figures, but I would guess a fair estimate would be that this game sold something like 1.2 million copies worldwide. If we look at it that way, 168,000 people decided to try the ranked ladder, and 95,000 of those never got past the first 10 games, and only 54,000 made it to 25 and onward. Now, I'm unable to get accurate figures for other games. Blizzard are famous for keeping everything about their games very close to their chest, so I've got nothing on StarCraft. However, I have been able to grab a little bit of other info from a couple of other games that suggests our Company of Heroes 2 figures are probably representative. Iron Harvest has an achievement for playing your first match in multiplayer, which seems to have been achieved by 18 to 19% of players. This is a little higher than the previous game we mentioned, but it's an indie title and one with far less content, so I'd say it's at least comparative. Age of Empires 4 doesn't have a similar achievement unfortunately, but it does have one for defeating various difficulties of AI. I think it's a reasonable assumption that most people who play the ranked matches have played against the AI in a skirmish at some point, either as a prelude before trying ranked or as a way of testing out a build or nation. Only 16% of players have defeated a hard AI, and just shy of 11% have defeated the hardest, which I think would indicate that our Company of Heroes 2 figures are in the right ballpark at the very least. So, what do we learn from this? Well, firstly, most people have zero interest in engaging in player versus player gameplay. That might come as a bit of a shock for some, considering how much attention this mode gets on most content platforms, but it's just not why most people buy a real-time strategy game. It might be the reason they watch a tournament or follow a streamer, but it's not the reason they decide to swipe their debit card or sell off their CSGO knives to buy a copy. This doesn't mean that the 1v1 aspect of a game should be ignored, as it's important to the long-term prospects of a game, but it does mean that it is only one of several considerations and probably not even the most important one. What this means is, if you put most of your focus on creating the perfect 1v1 experience, using a great deal of your development time on it while neglecting the other aspects, you could be alienating 85% of your player base. There does seem to be a lot of hype generated when a certain studio hires a pro player or two to help with balance and game design, and this is fine, as long as it is done as well as, rather than instead of, a good writer and mission designer. So, why is single player so important in an RTS? Well, as we can see, for the most people it is the game. If you create a great single player experience, then 85% of the people that play your game are going to have a positive impression, which leads to happy customers, good reviews and more sales. This increase in sales will then lead to a healthier player base and as a result, a higher chance of a more competitive scene. The extra sales will also generate a lot more revenue, which keeps the development studio in work and allows some to be reinvested back into the game in the way of hotfixes, improvements and DLC. You can rebalance the multiplayer mode in the weeks following your launch, but this will be far too late to fix your single player. People would have already had a negative experience, left bad reviews and moved on to something else by then. How exactly you make a good single player game is not something that everyone can agree on. I'm looking at you, Relic. But I think there should be some key objectives that must be kept front and centre during design, development and playtesting. You need to engage your players, give them something to become invested in, but also give them agency. They need to feel like the decisions they make have an effect on the game and that the game properly reacts to their input. There also needs to be a decent amount of content and not something they can just burn through in a couple of play sessions. This doesn't mean that you need 30 hours of carefully crafted story and highly scripted missions, but it does mean that those elements will need to be present intermittently along the way. The games I love the most do have some of these things, but they also have plenty of missions with a more free-form style of play where I can experiment, learn and explore all of the options available to me. For me to enjoy a single player experience, I need to feel like I've earned the victory and the progression of the story, not that I've just ticked the boxes I was told to tick in order to proceed. There are people that enjoy an interactive story and a real market for games like this, but a strategy title is probably not the right medium for one. This leads on to difficulty levels, and strategy games should be challenging. Not everyone is of the same skill level, so variable difficulty options should definitely be a thing, but in my opinion, if you don't fail at least half of the missions once, then it's probably too easy. I don't mean adding in random unexpected mechanics that force you to lose unless you specifically prepare for them, as these sorts of losses feel cheap and frustrating. What I mean is throwing different challenges at a player that require a balanced mix of strategies and units to respond to. A mission briefing could mention the enemy intend to attack immediately and then bring in their heavier units later. Perhaps the first 3 waves of infantry are easily defeated by a player that only builds machine gun squads, and a player might be tempted to focus on these, but if they solely invest in foot soldiers and don't have any anti-tank guns, then the vehicles that attack in the 4th and 5th wave will overwhelm them. As long as your missions are actually fun, then a player will be excited to try the challenge again and enjoy the prospect of changing their strategy to meet the task at hand. The right level of difficulty accomplishes 2 things. Firstly, it lengthens the campaign, providing more value, and secondly, it makes the eventual victory feel earned rather than guaranteed. This leads us to the big sister of single player, cooperative play. People want to play with their friends and others, but many of those don't enjoy the competitive nature of versus play and are far more comfortable fighting a computer opponent. A small cooperative campaign and perhaps some cooperative challenges can be a great way for non-competitively minded people to continue to play the game. It's also a great gateway into versus AI skirmishes that for some people will bridge the gap and make them invested enough to actually try the ranked play. It won't work for everyone, but with a popular game, converting even a few extra percentage points of players can result in a huge amount of extras joining the ranked mode, leading to shorter queue times and a better quality of matches for everyone. I think a modern RTS could be very successful if it puts some real focus on this journey. What do I mean by this? Well, after the completion of the campaign, it should really try and encourage the player to try some co-op, where the player could pick a Steam friend or be auto-matched with someone to play cooperative missions together. If the cooperative missions had some connection with the single player, maybe tied up some loose ends or served as an epilogue to the story, then people would naturally follow this path of progression. If you were really clever, you could even make this an introduction to versus play. Perhaps have some missions at the end where rather than directly working with another player to defeat an AI opponent, you are in competition with the other person, trying to compete to accomplish your specific objectives first. You would have to have a proper think about how this sort of mission could work, but I'm sure there's a way, and it would be a far gentler introduction than chucking them into a 1v1 ranked match and hoping for the best. I've heard other suggestions for getting people to try ranked play, but most of them just involve gating content behind arbitrary objectives. You know the type. Unlock this commander, doctrine or skin from playing 3 missions or winning one, but this sort of game design is just going to accomplish one thing, and that is to frustrate 85% of your player base. If you get your players invested in the game and keep them entertained, their love of your product and their natural curiosity will take them far further than any attempt to force, trick, bully or bait them will. I think the key takeaway from this is that a lively competitive scene only exists because of the casual community behind it. The single players, the co-op enjoyers and the custom game crowd are the livelihood of any strategy gaming community, These are the people that are going to be paying release day prices for your game, leaving the bulk of your reviews, purchasing each DLC, and supporting the YouTubers, streamers and pro players that are engaged with your game. So when you come to develop a new RTS game, even if your end goal is to try and replicate StarCraft's competitive success, you cannot neglect these people's needs or make content for them an afterthought. It would be easy to look back at StarCraft 2 in its heyday and just focus on the rank ladder, the pro players and the millions of dollars in tournament winnings and sponsorships, but it should not be forgotten that StarCraft 2 has 3 very solid single player campaigns, amazing scope for custom and arcade games, and the final expansion added cooperative missions which are still hugely popular to this day. So, single player and cooperative play, neglect them at your peril. Stormgate, an upcoming RTS, has plenty of focus on competitive play in both its own marketing and in the commentary of its supporters, but I'm happy to see that they do put focus on both single player and cooperative play front and centre of their synopsis on Steam. I really hope that they have thought about some of the topics I've discussed today, because getting that aspect right will probably be the difference between success and failure. Hi, I'm Calivan. I hope that you've been somewhat enriched by my single player musings, and as usual, if you've got anything to add, please let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate a like, and if you want more, please click the subscribe button.